Okay, so if you think about it, if humanity is going to survive itself, it is absolutely crucial that we move away from this very short-sighted view of the world that we've had, where it's just about exploiting natural resources as fast as we can to increase our short-term profits, and to move towards a mental and political structure in which we are choosing sustainability instead. All right, so let's just talk about what sustainability is. It really, if this isn't our goal as humanity, we're pretty much not going to be here for long, at least not as a civilization. So let's learn what it is. So the deal is this: right now, the way things have been for the, really, I guess we could say it really changed in the Industrial Revolution, but really going back to, the beginning of agriculture, maybe 10,000 years ago, is that humans basically tend to use resources, and that could be soil, that could be fossil fuels, it can be how we treat our atmosphere. We tend to use things in a very non-renewable way. We tend to look at the world as a very big place, and we can't run out of these things. And the more I use, the more money I make, and that's a good thing. And we often couch it in terms of, well, that's going to make more jobs for people. But that really isn't a very healthy approach because it is not sustainable, right? Okay, you will run out of these things. You will eventually suffer the consequences, like we're starting to suffer the consequences of global warming that scientists have been talking about, you know, for most of my adult life. Well, sustainability is the concept that we should use resources to the extent we can in a renewable fashion, to use them only at the rate at which they can be renewed and to conserve them. And if they're non renewables, to try to utilize them in a way where they can be reused and repurposed and recycled. Uh, because the idea is if we don't do this, then we will eventually run out of things, and the future generations will suffer greatly as a consequence of the decisions that we're making currently. And so many environmental scientists will argue that really what the battle actually is all about is transitioning ourselves towards a sustainable mentality, that we need to think in terms of sustainability, because if we don't, uh, obviously, if it's not sustainable, it means things will reach a breaking point. So, sustainable use of renewable resources mean that you're using them at a rate at which they can be replenished. So a good example would be an aquifer. Okay, so you see this picture here of center pivot irrigation. It's probably wheat growing maybe in eastern Washington. It's a very arid area, obviously. We can see by the brown ground around it. So we can grow this food here, and we can do it in a sustainable way or in a non-sustainable way. In a non-sustainable way, we pump the water out, and we don't worry about how fast the aquifer is recharging. In a sustainable model, we'd say, well, let's only pump as much water out as infiltrates back into the aquifer in a given year, so this aquifer will never run out. That's what sustainable mentality is about. So if we're going to have a sustainable approach to human activity, here's what we've got to do. All right, I'm just going to run down the list of things, and it shouldn't take long. First, we have to understand the vital importance of biodiversity. It is our friend. We need to protect it. It is crucial that we do. We can't let species go extinct, because once they go extinct, we've lost them forever. And we know that the more biodiversity is, the more stable our ecosystems are, and the more able to resist cataclysmic changes. The other thing we have to do is we have to understand that human population needs the growth of it needs to be slowed down. We need to bring the world population to where it stops growing. And in fact, we need to bring it back down. Now, this is not world population. This is just 127 million. This is for an individual country. But the idea is we don't need to just stop its growth. We actually need to decrease world population. Otherwise, the rate at which we're using resources will not be sustainable. The current human population is so large, we just can't. But you know what? This isn't a problem. We've seen if countries develop their economies, their populations will come down. The other thing is that we have to grow food in a way that doesn't result in soil loss. So, our traditional agricultural practices in most parts of the world lead to soil degradation and soil erosion. And soil, we've said, we talked about primary succession. It takes thousands of years for soil to form. that's just not, we can't replenish it in a human lifetime. So we need to look at soil as an absolutely crucial and non-renewable resource, and it can be conserved. It just takes rethinking our current agricultural practices. We need to try to move away from the overharvesting of wild fish species. Our oceans are currently under huge pressures by the fishing industry. And so maybe move towards aquaculture or certainly towards um, agreed upon and enforceable catch limits so that we can harvest fish in a sustainable way. If a billion fish mature each year and you take a billion fish out of the ocean, you'll never run out of fish. But if a billion fish reach maturity each year and you take 2 billion out each year, you don't have to be a genius to know you're going to run out of fish. We have to understand that fresh water, although it is renewable, right? The sun shines on the ocean and carries water out of the ocean and turns it into fresh water and drops it on the land. So it's a constant source, so it should be renewable, but only if we use it in a renewable way. So we have to make sure that we don't end up situations where, like the Ogallala Aquifer, where water is running out, where we don't dam rivers and take so much out of them that we end up losing the ROC or the Colorado River running into the Gulf of Sea of Cortez with, well, basically no water left in it. And we also have to understand that our atmosphere can't just be a dumping ground, especially for carbon dioxide. So, for the entirety of the Industrial Revolution, people have been able to burn coal, oil, and natural gas and just drop the emissions into the atmosphere with no consequences to themselves personally. This is not sustainable. We now see that the atmosphere cannot get rid of the carbon dioxide fast enough, and the consequences of global warming, although we haven't really discussed them in any great detail yet, we will this year. But it is important to note that you can't look at the atmosphere as this infinite source of um, dump space. That you have to understand that you are changing its composition by dropping carbon dioxide into it. And we also have to understand that mineral resources are, by their very nature, non-renewable. And so, if we just dig them out of the ground, use them, and then throw them away into our garbage, like garbage, you will run out of them. And there's certain things, like I think I've pointed out in the past, like neodymium, which is used in headphone magnets. We should be separating out these materials so that it's easier to recover them after use. That we have to understand that there's not more neodymium coming into the world, right? You have a certain amount on Earth, and you have to conserve it, otherwise future generations won't have it. And ultimately, what this really comes down to is this: it is human nature to look after our own and to only worry about our own interests. It is in our DNA. We cannot help it. This is who we are as a species. And so this always leads to the tragedy of the commons. So it's going to be necessary then for political leaders to implement policies and laws that basically are going to protect future generations from losing these resources. And so we have to get away from short-sighted, profit-driven decision making towards more long-term decision making. Thanks.